And we are live. Hey, kids. It's another Wednesday, almost 6 p.m. on the East Coast, almost 3 p.m. on the West Coast, and really, really late in the Czech Republic. I'm making a couple of little adjustments here, as we normally do, as we're getting, there we go. Caleb, that's your new name, Caleb. I'm calling you Caleb. Caleb. It's kind of like it's like your vacation name. What's up, Caleb?
Vacation name? I don't know what even that means.
Like when you go on vacation, you just have a vacation name. I don't know if it means anything. I'm just saying that you could have a vacation name. Okay. So here we are, everybody. This is the pre-Flask show where we are not drinking, at least alcoholic beverages. And welcoming you here. We are waiting for our good friend Ben Barden. This is, of course, Caleb Pike from DSLR Video Shooter. I am Jem Schofield from the C47. You are on my channel, and we do the official start of this thing at 3 p.m. Eastern. And today our host will be none other than the golden child, Mr. Caleb Pike. Yes.
It's not going away, is it?
Yeah, I go by Jem Schofield on vacation, Bart. So welcome to everybody who's at the pre-Flask. Caleb, how's your week going besides the kind of, the
flu stuff going around?
Yeah.
Somehow, I haven't gotten it.
Dodge that bullet.
Two kids, everyone else in the house went down, man. But
I'm usually pretty good at it. I'm usually pretty good at dodging the bullet. So all the best to you on that. Question for you. Oh, there he is.
There he is.
He's in the Lake District, obviously. He's muted at the moment. Oh, no, now he's unmuted. Okay, he's like in 8-bit now when he's in the Lake District. And you're like in 16 or 32-bit when you're back in the Czech Republic.
Right. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can see me.
Holy cow, I can hear you. Yes.
Yes, we can. You're very loud, actually.
I
mean, not that you're not usually, but you are quite loud.
All right. Let me try to sort that out a little.
Well, Double B is making his adjustments over there, Caleb.
Yes.
I will say that both Ben and I are booked for NAB 2019 in terms of our flight. So, just so you know.
So I got to get on that, huh?
Yep. That's it. We're arriving Thursday, the 4th, setting up on the 5th and doing the workshops on the Saturday and Sunday. No heavy storms in the barn, by the way. It's pretty quiet here today. That could all change in a moment. I live in Oregon. Bart's booked up for NAB. Looks like we might have a drink with Bart while we're in Vegas.
There you go.
That'd be good.
What's going on, Bart? And yes, ticking time bomb. That's how I feel, Harrison.
Travis, good evening.
Just waiting.
Travis, good evening. What else we've got? Who else is here? 360 grad, of course. One day we'll learn his name.
Who we missing? We're missing the Penguin? Grumpy Penguin?
Grumpy Penguin didn't even come last week. I felt a little upset about that. But, we'll see how it all goes.
And then who am I missing? Who's our other spirited viewer?
We've got a few of them. Oh yeah,
Rimrock's in the house.
Yeah, Rimrock's gonna be a talker. NAB will be good this year. Yeah, NAB. I had a conversation with my friend Dan Chung, the Chunginator from Atomos and old news shooter and Photo Gear News days, and we were saying, the dynamic of NAB has really changed a lot over the last few years. But I think overall for the better, and I'm not talking about the hype or no hype around products. I just think it's mellower. Like everybody's kind of settled down. It was kind of electrified back in the DSLR days.
It was cool. You were sitting there on Monday morning on your phone going crazy with new announcements every 2 seconds, and it doesn't really happen anymore.
No, I mean that was fun, but I kind of like the mellowness of it too. Maybe that's just because I'm getting a little bit.
There he is, part-time. There he is. How you doing, buddy?
The party has started now. Yeah, okay. Part-time is here. Even the name just means just kick back. It's part-time films, TYME. Awesome. So who else do we got here? Last couple of years, skipped NAB for Cine Gear. I thought you were saying you're so Southern California. Yeah, Cine Gear. Oh, let's talk about Cine Gear for a minute, gentlemen. So it's not going to be on the Paramount lot this year. And I think I've mentioned this. My oldest daughter's getting, she's not getting married, thank God. I don't know where that came from. She is graduating from high school that weekend. So I will not be able to make Cine Gear. Yeah, I just saw myself like in the future. That was scary. But
walking down the aisle. Here we go. Good night.
Daddy's dance. It's all weird. God. Okay, so we so I won't be going, but apparently they don't actually have not announced a location yet, because it's so great, that show, when you're on the Paramount backlot, and it's just so laid back, especially after NAB, and it's so corporate and everything else. And I heard a rumor, though I don't know if it's true, that it may even be in downtown LA, which would really suck us. So it might be a blessing in disguise that I'm not going this year. And then, of course, they have Cine Gear in Atlanta. What were we going to say, Ben? Sorry.
Well, on that note, there's the BSC show in London, which is in about a fortnight's time, and that's a free show, and that is also, it's small, but it's really good. So if you're in town, that's well worth checking out.
It's great.
Back to see Friday and Saturday. I went last year.
It's a great show. Yeah. Good. Lakeshore Studio 4 is thinking about coming to NAB this year. If you've never been, then as we lead up to it, I think the three of us can give you some advice. And the first piece of advice is drink lots and lots and lots of water. And that doesn't mean because you've been drinking. It's just you're in a desert and you tend not to drink as much when you're walking around and taking in the show. Of course, a very close second is very comfortable shoes. Gentlemen, anything you would recommend? Caleb, what do you got for NAB visiting recommendations?
I bet Ben's been going for more years than me, but I would say if you're into the stuff that we talk about and we're into, I would completely skip, at least at first, the North Hall. Yeah. Just go right for the jugular, go to Central Hall. Yeah. Hang out there. South Hall, there's some gems. If you're into post-production, the way I think of it is like North Hall is like all suit and tie, systems, integrations. Let's exchange business cards all day. Central is just a bunch of hipsters and cameras. And then the South Hall is like these like post-production, rotoscoping rat guys that have never seen the sun, It's awesome. Exactly. All the software companies and Red and Blackmagic.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, maybe not
Red anymore. They're out. They're only Cine Gear. But I will say this: the South Hall has changed considerably. The South Hall used to be the Buzz Hall before the whole DSLR thing happened. So it used to be that it was Apple and it was Adobe and it was Avid and it was Blackmagic and all of these. And like the South Hall was the explosive hall. And now really the only company that I would say that, well, I mean, obviously people go to see Adobe, but Blackmagic still takes up that big area.
Yeah.
And so in the old days, it was really funny, though, because you used to have Apple, and I think it was Avid was right across from them, and they basically shouted at each other. Basically, they'd raise the volume, and there was this little guy who would go around the show, and he had a meter in terms of decibel levels, and he would have to go and warn booths not to be so loud. So,
wow.
Oh my God, he arrived. She arrived. Oh my God, we have part-time film.
We've been blessed.
and the Grumpy Penguin. It is amazing. And before we even do our official kickoff, so it's happening this week. This is a big one, I have to say. Now we're really on board. You guys better have some drinks. Somebody made a comment, Ben, that your voice sounded a little higher today, and I had heard that maybe it was just in the beginning when you made some adjustments.
Maybe. Do I sound back to normal again? I should be sounding very, very tired. And
you sound tired, but you sound like you have
like a super mic.
Like you've been inhaling just a very slight amount of helium, but like it's like a slow drip of helium into your bloodstream.
It's true.
Amazing.
I thought of it too. Yeah. Got a little filter on there.
Oh, Grumpy Penguin has a
no
Manhattan ready to go. Look at that.
Welcome, Grumpy. We have red ears. We were talking about you.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
Do I want to pick up where I left off last week on Brexit?
Yeah.
My opinion hasn't changed on it since this time last week.
Expletive. Yeah, it's a mess. So by the little helium-y. So get a nickname. So we are actually just about to hit our time. We don't have fancy music yet on this show. We haven't gotten to that point. But Grumpy Penguin, I heard that last week. Sorry, don't have a typical 9 to 5, so I can't make it every week. Yeah, but you know what? What you should do actually is we would just like it if you would just log in. You can just continue working, but just having the Grumpy Penguin in each of our live streams makes it better.
When your glowing rubber mitt descends upon our stream, it brings such joy.
It does. Well, here we are, Caleb. I'm going to switch over to you because you are our captain this week. So I'll let you take us into this next adventure. Let's do it.
So here we go. 5 p.m. Welcome everybody to the Camera and Flash show. We do this every single week. If you're new in the chat, first of all, say hi. Be great to meet you. Secondly, every single week, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel, the C47, so you can get this stuff on the regular. If you, for whatever reason, want to go back and check out other wonderful episodes, I believe there's a playlist in the description as well. So we're going to kick things off by running through the rest of the guys here. My name is Caleb Pike. I run DSLR Video Shooter here on YouTube. We've got Jem Schofield of this channel, the C47. Jem.
Hey. Oh, I'm Jem.
There you are.
The C47. I shoot a lot. I teach a lot. I eat a lot. I cook a lot. And sometimes I drink.
There you go.
Ben?
And then Mr. Ben Barden.
So I'm photographer, filmmaker. I live in the Czech Republic, but I work mainly in the UK, which is where I am right now. I've flown over this week for a pitch. So I've been working on that solidly since about 5 o'clock this morning, which I have to go and present very early tomorrow morning. So I'm kind of
snap.
Yeah. But
I'm
then
sorry.
the old high pitch thing, that's not to do with, I don't know what's going on with this. I'm kind of really self-conscious about it now. I'm gonna start trying to speak really low. I'm gonna bro my voice down to something really, if we can get back to my normal kind of pitch.
Sure.
That is about your normal pitch, right?
Okay,
there.
so I'm like trying as low as I can.
Wow. Well, maybe you should mute your camera and mic, and maybe that'll fix it if you come back. I don't know. That's odd. That's something else. Something with the bit rate or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So this week, briefly before we talk about what we're drinking, we're talking about RAW. So if you're just tuning in, today it's all about RAW. Lots happening already, much less what's going to happen later this year and in the future. So we're going to jump into all that stuff. But first, Mr. Ben, I'm going to go back to you. What you drinking this week?
Okay, so I am drinking, this is a return to an old favorite. This is Glenmarnock. So this is a Highland Speyside whiskey. So that's what I'm on.
Should make your voice a little bit deeper when you drink that, I would say.
There you go.
Maybe smoother. I don't know if it's going to affect the pitch.
Okay, good.
And then Mr. Jem Schofield.
Okay, good. Before I do that, because we'll get, so yes, there are buses from the hotels to the show Monday through Thursday at NAB. I just want to answer a couple of things. Yes, the monorail is a great option. In fact, if you email me through the C47's website, the c47.com, through the contact form, I'll send you a link to a monorail page that gives you 20% off of monorail tickets. So you can do like a 4-day for 28 bucks and change. It's a great way to get back and forth. So I think that's good. So sorry about that. That was just an aside, but I think we'll get lost in those comments later on. So this week I'm actually going to make a mixed drink. Not really that fancy. It's called a rusty nail, which is basically scotch, and drambuie, which is basically scotch with spices and herbs, or herbs, as some people like to say. and honey. And you mix it basically per a recipe, or if you're me, you just put more scotch than you put Drambuie. And because I don't like drinks that are too sweet, but I'm just kind of in the mood for this. And so I'm having that over a little bit of ice. It's really the only time I break the ice rule.
Okay.
And,
it's a good drink. I like that a lot.
That's the rusty nail right there. Okay.
Beautiful.
And Caleb, what do you got?
Well, I drank all of the whiskey I was going to talk about. So we're in between runs to the liquor store. So we're doing Charles Shaw.
Mm.
This is a fine bottle of wine from Trader Joe's.
Okay.
It's about $4, and it's a red blend.
So it'll be full bodied and easy drinking, essentially.
Very, very. Yeah.
Nice.
I've destroyed the bullet, and I need more.
Well,
bullet high.
Might need a run. It's been working for you this week, dodging that other bullet. So maybe you need to go get another bottle.
Exactly. This might be the night. Yep.
Okay, good. Awesome.
Okay, so
thank you. I'm liking
that. The red?
Yeah, no, the whole glass, the bulbous glass thing, that's lovely.
Oh yeah. Gotta let it, decanter a little bit.
Yeah.
Like that.
Aerate, all that good stuff. So let's jump into today's topic. And before we do, you guys are already tearing it up in the chat, which I absolutely love. But yeah, as we go through this, any questions you guys have at all, comments, concerns about Ben and his well-being and his health and his voice, we welcome it. We'd love to hear from you. And let's just go ahead and jump straight in. So RAW, clearly we've had some developments recently. Last year at NAB, ProRes RAW was a big deal. This year, just not too long ago, Blackmagic was talking a lot about their new Blackmagic RAW. And then we've got...
Uh-oh. Are you still there?
I'm still here. Dear. I think he's gone.
It's a great frozen frame here. So he'll come back. And here we go. All right. So I'm going to pick up from where Caleb was leaving off here. So we've had some really big developments here in terms of what's been going on. Last year, we had an announcement that has a little bit of... Oh, there he is. All right. Can you...
Once again, people's like, you don't need to be logged in. Why are you logged in?
You're frozen. All right.
All right.
So pick it up from where you were. We were talking about...
And recently, Nikon, working with Adamus to give us essentially RAW over HDMI, and that changes everything. Not because that's Nikon, not because that's necessarily Adamus, but because we're using HDMI as just a pipeline for something other than a video signal, which is pretty exciting. So, both of you have shot way more with Blackmagic cameras. So, any thought? Have any of you shot with Blackmagic RAW?
No.
No. Okay.
Very, very, very interested.
How about just DNG in general?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And multiple cameras. I shoot that with the I shoot RAW now on the C200.
Okay.
And I've been shooting it from the FS700 for quite a while.
Right. Great. And chat, let us know if there's something very particular you'd like us to maybe start off with or talk about first or with RAW, because there's so many different ways we could take this. We could talk about ProRes RAW and Blackmagic RAW, or I think maybe it'd be good to talk about kind of the trends. So we've had DNG style, huge files, kind of old school RAW, and we're now getting into this new breed, which has a couple different interesting things. So compression is a big one. How much of it there is and how little that impacts the image quality. So essentially really high compressed, small file sizes, amazing image. And then variable quality, or what's the term for that? ProRes RAW, that was their big thing is, if your scene is super complex, ProRes RAW can adapt to that and record more.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are kind of the two big ones. Anything else? I know there's, all the tech between what the camera is doing. What's special about Blackmagic RAW is, there's more happening on the camera side.
Yeah.
So should we maybe start just talking about the fact, and I think that most of the people who show up here know this, but there is a very distinct difference between RAW and any video-based codec in the sense that RAW is essentially ones and zeros. So it's capturing information off of the sensor of a camera system. And then at a certain point in the pipeline, and it used to always be in the post-production point in the pipeline, that image would historically get debayered, and it would basically get turned into a video signal. So it was something that we could see. Now, of course, if you're capturing RAW internally to a camera, but you're seeing an image on your screen of your camera system, you're not looking at RAW. You're looking at a video signal representation of what your camera is capturing. And depending on how good or generally how bad your monitor is, you're really looking at a very limited amount of information based on what's actually being captured either internally or externally by the camera system. You know, as Caleb said before, when we're talking about especially cinema DNG files, you're essentially looking at a folder structure of individual still images, 24 or 30 or 60 per second. And those are then essentially stitched together in a timeline and then debayered. And then you're able to do things like make adjustments. And depending on what camera company and what flavor of RAW you're working with, you could get more or less control over what that sensor data is, having to do with adjusting your white balance, having to do with adjusting your ISO, and other things, or you might not. Canon is infamous for when they released the C500, they had RAW in that camera system coming out of it. The data rate was so, and is in the C300 Mark II, so high that if you're recording it at that data rate, they're not giving you necessarily always those controls, though there have been some updates where they are now to those ISO and white balance things, but there's so much information in the recorded file that making those adjustments is effectively not a big deal. Also, generally, RAW is 12-bit as opposed to 8 or 10-bit. It can be interpreted as linear or in logarithmic terms, and I think that's as far as I want to go down the rabbit hole there. But I do want to acknowledge that some of the things that are now happening with ProRes RAW and happening with Blackmagic's RAW, or Blackmagic Design RAW, BMD RAW, is actually quite different. They are dealing with that pipeline a little bit differently. And I don't know if you gents watched Grant Perry's video where he kind of explains Blackmagic or BMD RAW, but the way they're interpreting and dealing with things when they're using that version of RAW that they've developed is very, very different, where some of that debayering or demosaic process is actually happening inside the camera system, which leads me to believe that we are actually already doing a partial video signal conversion before it goes down the pipeline to whatever your recording device is or your computer or hard drive. So that's kind of fascinating in terms of stuff. So some other stuff going on. Yeah, really fascinating.
But it's not only that's been done at the camera side, it's also the way that the compression works on that. So when you're talking about the compressed RAW, and when we're thinking about compression, we're normally talking about taking the video feed and then we're compressing the video signal. And with that, it's compressing the data before it gets turned into a video signal. So the way that we think about compression in terms of the way I was kind of imagining it was when you zip with a compressed zip with a Word document, you know, it doesn't really change anything.
Yep.
But it does. It used to when you do that with a JPEG, it would start damaging it, and it's a bit the same. So our sort of traditional mindset that we have of compression really deteriorating the quality of the image doesn't seem to be doing that with this system. And I haven't played with it yet, but it sounds massively exciting.
Yeah. So it sounds like, oh yeah. So it seems the compressed lossless compression is kind of where we're headed. And in that video that Jem kindly sent Ben and I, Grant was had some other DPs quotes, and a lot of them, or one of them in particular, was really loving just 12:1, the highest compression rate.
Yeah, the highest constant bit rate compression rate. And then you have a Q0 and a Q5, which is a variable bit rate, which can get to pretty high data rates. Yeah.
And I've not worked with, I've worked a lot with ProRes RAW, not Blackmagic RAW at all. And then just recently, I've been working on content. I'm actually working on a guide right now for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. And I was surprised at how well 4:1 holds up. In fact, lossless compared to 4:1 on that camera, I really can't tell a difference almost with any test I've done. And 4:1 is really not much larger file size wise than ProRes HQ. Right. So a lot of people have been covering that camera and just saying, oh, ProRes is great. I don't want to deal with RAW because of the file sizes. I mean, the workflow's, you know, a little different, obviously, but round tripping super easy with Resolve. But it's amazing how the compression, I just wasn't expecting that.
So Caleb, from your experience, I guess, and I think I'm starting to notice this, like Ben, maybe you are as well. And by the way, Caleb, if you get a chance, if you could post the link to that video and that article, that would be awesome.
Sure. Yeah, I'll grab that real quick.
You know, it's really interesting because I think really our perception of what's happening, not only in RAW, but just in terms of video compression, is starting to change. We're not only starting to see the introduction of 10-bit, minimally 420 internally into these mirrorless camera systems, but with the HEVC or H.265, I am starting to see, at least based on some of my initial tests with the Fujifilm X-T3, which is a camera I'm going to be now actually buying shortly, that that their compression is extremely efficient. In fact, sometimes when I'm in the H.265, I don't really see a big, huge difference in take for me going between 200 and 400 megabits per second. So if I can record at half the data rate and get something that in most situations is going to be giving me what I need for the content that I'm using that camera for most of the time, then that's great. But I think the algorithms are getting better. I think that the formulas are getting better. It does kind of solidify maybe some of the thoughts that we've had, because if you remember, and I'm just going to click over to you guys as well to get your reaction on this, when the C100 Mark 1 and Mark 2 came out, and the C300, there was kind of this feeling of how can 8-bit look so good at such a low data rate? Because we were looking on the C300 at 50 megabits per second, on the C100 35 megabits per second, and the great ability of a Canon camera at 8-bit tended to, at the time that those cameras came out, to be far more possible than some of the other 8-bit cameras that are on the market. And I do think that what happens behind the scenes can have a pretty big effect on what we can and can't do with those images in post. Do you guys have feelings on that at all?
Ben. Sorry, I do that all the time. Like, and other person.
No, because
you're
like
talking
here,
about.
Yeah, I mean, here's a good example. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
You're just talking about how far video has come, essentially.
Yeah, I think we started to see it with the Canon cameras, because they were doing stuff that with 8-bit that we were like kind of scratching our head with, and I wasn't getting the same stuff out of let's say a Sony camera at the time.
No, sure. No. Well, and that's the same thing, again with the C200, in that it's all the spec that everyone hates, and there's this constant sort of bitching about that needs its 10-bit codec in it, which it does, but the 8-bit holds up remarkably well, and was the reason I ended up buying that, was because for a lot of the stuff I do, it's great shooting RAW, and I'm falling in love with the RAW on it now, and that's a whole nother story. But the 8-bit is far better than other cameras that I've used that on paper have the same kind of data rates and the same sort of spec file, and it just handles it better.
Good.
Yeah, so it's just going to get better and better. Like what I love about, not to be Mr. Panasonic over here again, as usual, but the GH5 5S and Panasonic, they have this one setting. So you've got your 100 megabits, just like the Sony's for 4K, long GOP 420 or whatever. But they have a 150 that's 10-bit 422. And that's what I use for YouTube, because you're still getting a smaller file size, but you're getting a little bit of that yummy stuff. So you don't have to go all the way. You don't have to go all the way.
Is that 10-bit?
Yeah,
the 150 is 10-bit. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And if that's on both cameras, on the G8 to 5 and the S.
Correct. Yeah. So a lot of people think you have to go all the way up to 400, which you can do. But at 150, you can tap into that, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's yeah, and by the way, if you're just joining us and you're listening to Ben, you are not playing back at 1.25x in your timeline.
No,
we're still
we
trying
still
to
don't know
figure that out.
why this is happening.
Yeah. Okay, good.
He's got a masculine, Hulk level voice in real life. So
yeah,
you'll just have to meet him if you're new.
So the chat is blowing up here, and I just don't want to get too far behind here because we've got some interesting things that are some follow-ups to what we're talking about. So let me just go ahead and first of all, Ned, Caleb. So then, would you recommend 4:1 over lossless RAW on the new Pocket camera at the moment for what you're seeing most of the time?
I think so. I mean, I've yet to find an instance where lossless was like, oh wow, that looks so much better. Yeah. It's nothing like ProRes, where as you go down the line from HQ to 422 to LT to proxy, it's very obvious the drop in quality. With the RAW, I haven't noticed anything. So I'm sure there's some instance, but yeah.
Good. So so that said, I mean, I think many of us haven't entertained the idea of using RAW in sort of the recent past or since it's been released in most of our projects because of data size. So what ProRes RAW and BMD RAW are going to give us is they're going to give us much smaller packages that are going to have data rates that are going to be similar, sometimes even more efficient than some of the video codecs, which means that we're going to be able to work in RAW and have more control over our images. And I think that that's really the exciting thing. Blackmagic's doing it in a very different way than Apple. And the biggest thing that they're doing is they're making their software developer kit available to everybody so they can integrate this RAW that they've developed. And they can integrate it into whatever they want. So if they decide to integrate it into their NLE or grading software, they can do that. I'm assuming that also means that they have the option to include it in their camera system, which could be pretty interesting overall. And I don't know if that's true, but
no one's jumped on that yet, have there? There's been no other camera that's running that, and that was NAB that codec was announced, and that video that we've been referencing that was launched. Well, however many months ago that is, 8, 9 months
about
ago.
IBC. IBC was really when we were hearing,
yeah.
And then with BMD RAW also, it's it's just in the Ursa Mini Pro right now, and that's, as far as I understand, it's still in beta, and they have announced that it will come to the Pocket camera, and so we will see it in other things. That's official. It's just when will we see it? And I'm assuming somewhere around around NAB. So you guys want to pick up a couple more of these comments, because we want to dig into these, but I think maybe these comments and stuff will help us go down some of these avenues we want to go down.
Lakeshore Studios. I've never shot in RAW before. Is there a difference in bit depth when shooting RAW, 8-bit versus 10-bit? Jem, a little earlier, you talked about 12-bit is traditionally what we're looking at there.
Yes, correct. Yep, 12-bit. And that was one of the big questions for the RAW over HDMI for the announcement from the Atomos announcement was, is that actually 12-bit? And it is actually 12-bit. They still haven't finalized their communication between Nikon, and Atomos in terms of whether that's going to be 12-bit linear, 12-bit log. There's a lot of handshaking that goes on between the camera and whatever receives that signal when you're doing this, and they're going to have to figure that stuff out. Susie, I don't want to forget this. This question might get lost in this episode having to do with lighting a single cyc. So if it does, please just email me through the c47.com and we can have a separate dialogue about that. Somebody reached out to me last week about a question. I did reply. I haven't heard back from them. I can't even remember what the question is now because I get a lot, but I'm happy to have conversations about that stuff off of the live stream. Caleb, what other questions kind of taking us into some things that you can see?
These new ProRes RAW, Blackmagic RAW formats are exciting. Going to make RAW available to more of us from Room Rock, and I think that's what's really interesting here. Is not only is there ProRes RAW and Blackmagic RAW, but the fact that in who knows how many months, we'll have a full frame RAW option ish, depending on how you feel about ProRes RAW from Nikon and Adamus, and then we'll have the Pocket 4K. So two options, two very different cameras, very different RAW formats, both under what, 3,000, I think. Yeah, for the full enchilada. That's something else. And not only, yeah, it's like the most cutting edge RAW will be available for under $3,000. That's wild.
Yeah. And the exciting thing as well about the whole thing is it's not just that we're now going to be able to buy storage for the stuff and that we've got cameras at a decent price point that are shooting this. We can actually edit this stuff now with these formats. That's the big thing. And it's the biggest pain in the ass that RAW has always been, in that it's an absolute nightmare to deal with in post, because your machine just shits itself the second it sees it.
Yeah.
Unless you're dealing with a dedicated machine for that, that's kind of what happens. But or you're having to do proxies, or it's caching, doing massive caches to get it to play back in anything like reasonably real time. But that opens that up to be cutting that really smoothly, and particularly the Blackmagic system, which again is very interesting, and it'd be really exciting to see if other manufacturers do take that on board with it being open source.
Yeah. And someone earlier, please repeat it if I can't find it, which I don't think I can. It's somewhere in there. Said they wonder if, or they think, all these manufacturers will start getting on board with their own RAW options. In which case, things could get pretty interesting with. This could be like a huge wave of who knows what. With like, is Apple going to add Blackmagic RAW to Final Cut 10? I have a hard time seeing that.
Because it's Apple.
They'll just be like, no, we have ProRes RAW.
Yeah,
but
will ProRes RAW be available in Premiere? Maybe, maybe not.
But we know BMD RAW won't be available in Atomos Recorder. That's for sure.
Yeah. There's that whole thing. We'll so let me
moving swiftly on.
So if you shoot with Premiere and you love Nikon, you're in trouble. There's going to be this whole mess of what cameras use what format and what NLEs use what. It's going to be this nightmare.
But then Apple have done. There's been this thing with, because I'm on a Mac right now, but when I'm at home, my edit machine's a PC, and Premiere is now able to export and ProRes again
on Windows.
Yes, correct.
Oh,
latest edition came out. So Apple's kind of closed shop thing is maybe opening up a little bit. It was a surprise to see that coming, because I've been using, if you're using an intermediate codec, I've been using DNX for that now.
Right.
Switched over. And it hasn't been, it's not caused any problems really, but it's great to have that back. Really good.
Well, I will say this. This is just a little bit of a feeling here. And there is going to be a little bit of a struggle with all of this stuff. But if Adobe can sort out with Apple ProRes RAW in Premiere Pro, and that comes before BMD RAW, then I think the momentum will be there. And then we just need to see cameras that are supporting it, or more people that are going, at least for the time being, to external recorders until it's internally there. So, it doesn't look like BMD RAW is coming to market tomorrow. It's in beta. It's in one camera. It's going to roll out to other cameras. It's obviously supported by Resolve already. But again, if Apple and Adobe can work their stuff out and it gets into Premiere Pro, I think that that's the start of some momentum. It doesn't mean that I think that ProRes RAW is better. I and none of us have worked with it enough, or with BMD RAW at all, to know, except for playing with the files a little bit, whether or not one is technically going to be better than the other. But the momentum thing can really mean something. And I think that support in other NLEs of any of these two flavors, or both of these two flavors, and when that happens, will have impact on adoption, I think.
Yeah.
Rimrock, Apple has not said anything publicly. The best I could find when it comes to Adobe and Apple being supporting Apple allowing Adobe to use ProRes RAW was a forum post where some Adobe person answered a question saying, we're looking into it. So what Ben said about them getting that set up on Windows using ProRes, that says a lot to me. I mean, that I feel like that's kind of a pretty
It was out of the, and that was out
pointer.
of the blue. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was a surprise. It was a surprise.
The one thing we could talk about a little bit is ProRes RAW or both of these all RAW in post-production, right? So if we look at kind of the broad spectrum, I've never used Canon's RAW, so you guys could have to inform me on that. But Red is amazing. They've got their own software, great integration into Final Cut. Works wonderfully. Blackmagic using Resolve, that would be amazing. I'd love to be able to work with Blackmagic RAW or just DNG in Final Cut, but that's not supported. Probably because there's ProRes RAW. But that works very well in Resolve. And then there's Apple's ProRes RAW, which you import it and you start grading it. That's it. There's a way to change how you view the footage, but there is zero dials, zero sliders. There's absolutely no way to adjust any of that stuff. And in that regard, I think any other RAW is superior in that, category, just because you know what's going on. With ProRes RAW, you're tweaking it, you're changing you just grade it. That's literally what they tell you to do. And then at one point, randomly, boom, there's just tons of noise. And you have to figure out what you did to cause it to trip up, 600 ISO. You have no way to adjust that. So for guys like us and Jem and I were talking about this off stream, if you know your native ISO and you want to, irk every ounce of dynamic range out of your camera, you just can't adjust that stuff, which is frustrating. You literally just start working with a 3-way corrector.
Right. Yeah. And technically it's raw. So when you're making your adjustments in terms of your dynamic range, you're going to hit places where you have more or less dynamic range. Because effectively what happens, everybody, is, when you take a raw signal and you turn it into a video signal, at least for us, when we're working with it, we have to convert it to some sort of gamut color space, and we have to convert it to some sort of dynamic range. And generally, the dynamic range that we convert it to is some sort of log, curve. So that might be Canon log 2, Canon log 3. It might be S log 2, S log 3. It might be, V log. It might be whatever it is. But you're essentially taking it and you're putting that data on there. And one of the big things that's the challenge for working with these new versions of RAW and RAW in general is all of the flags. Because what has to happen is you have to get as much or all of the data that's coming from the sensor of what that sensor is, so that when you turn it into a video signal on the other end, that it is a predictable result that you're going to get that is based on what the camera operator's choices were. Because when we're shooting with a camera, even in RAW, we're generally choosing whether or not we are shooting in a log, curve, and if we're shooting with a certain gamut, 709, P3, 2020. So there's all of this other stuff that's going on, and it's almost mind-boggling how much is occurring when all of this is happening. But what we need as content creators is we need predictability in terms of what that final image is. And I think that that's what Grant Perry was talking about with the challenge with RAW prior to BMD RAW, which they developed, which is that they would have, just sort of like this bucket of still images that would be grabbing sensor data, but they weren't grabbing all of the key data in terms of the color science of the camera and all of the other stuff. So you're not getting standardized, predictable results no matter where you're looking at the image, camera, Resolve, hopefully other NLEs, and I really do hope that other NLEs do support it. I'm not so sure Final Cut's going to do it initially. But again, Premiere Pro is sort of that sweet spot where we can maybe see support for both of these in Premiere Pro, because Adobe doesn't really have anything to lose when it comes to that.
Yeah.
No.
It could be interesting if this is the second comeback of Premiere, because they had that huge win after 10 came out, and then 10 slowly got better and better. And I feel like Premiere was starting to, I don't feel like it was true.
Right.
People were like tired of getting of it crashing constantly, and Final Cut was getting really solid. And
yeah,
interesting.
Yep.
It's because it's still at the moment, it's still performance wise, it's hard to get it to run smoothly and to get it set up well for dealing with particularly sort of raw formats.
Lots of old code.
Yeah, whereas when you're dealing with Resolve and on the exact same machine, and I actually spec my machine to run Premiere properly, but on the same machine, Resolve deals with, particularly with raw footage, just so much better. So much better. And when you have that set up right and you have it caching properly, that'll play back anything raw that I've ever thrown into it. It plays that back pretty much straight off.
It really is amazing. Like I was expecting it to be a nightmare because I haven't dealt with RAW in so long. And so this lossless Pocket 4K stuff, full res, no drop frames on an iMac 5K. It's just amazing.
And also that if you're dealing with, as Jem was saying earlier, that you've got to kind of map this into something that we can see. So Resolve's very good, and it has this kind of very linear workflow in the way that you're dealing with the color science of it. So you're saying, we're bringing this raw, and when you bring in raw from this camera, I want you to treat this as, so for if it's Canon RAW coming in, I want you to map this to C-Log 2 or 3, and then you're ending up with an image that you can then cut, and then you're starting to LUT it to 709 or to individual looks that you want from there on. So it's like that additional step, but it's so easily streamlined in that, and particularly using that kind of node system. So I don't really use Final Cut so much because my Mac's not really up to it, but the PC edit machine, Resolve, is so much better than Premiere now that I only really use that if there's a lot of graphic stuff, because Resolve's still not as good at dealing with that as Premiere is. But it's sometimes now that I go edit the whole thing out, grade it all, and then send it out to Premiere, and I only just do those final bits of graphics work into that, because it's just night and day different how much better it is at dealing with those files.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
It's the other thing is, and Caleb, you may have heard of this also, and this is all kind of coming back to this whole announcement of ProRes RAW over HDMI. Is I don't know if it was in an interview at the show at CES or it was on the webinar that I was on, but Jeremy made it very clear. Jeremy Young, the guy who runs Atomos, the guy, that we're looking at ProRes RAW in kind of a 1.0. And I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe that means that Apple is going to open up some of these controls for us. Somebody made a comment here in the text thread that they can actually make some changes with certain things with a text file. So I'm really hoping, that's not even the word. I'm really hoping that that there's actually some controls, because it's not like Apple's never done this before. When Aperture came out, they first made the blunder with Aperture 1, because I have a long history with that product, where they would support RAW, but they basically put their little formula on top of the RAW coming from each of the cameras, and they wouldn't let you disable it, or it wasn't an option in the first version. And then in a later version, I think the next rev, they basically said, here's a little box that you can tick on and off that allows you to, have your own control over the RAW file that's coming in. So I have a feeling that, I hope that opens up a little bit more, because I really would like to be able to see the data that's coming from, the camera, and not just read it as metadata. I would like to actually be able to do things like change the white balance and the ISO and all of the stuff that we would, really like to have control over from these files.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, it's crazy stuff.
Yeah,
some questions here. That's disappointed to hear about ProRes RAW, and that's a good point. Like, if you look at Final Cut, forget RAW. That's how they roll, right? They got Final Cut up, Final Cut 10. People hated it, and then they started implementing feature integration upgrade, incremental upgrades that made a huge difference, and now people love it. Like their color. Remember when it was just that rainbow wall?
Yeah.
You just get on board or get out of here.
Yep, garbage.
And here they are with a decent for an NLE built-in color
Yeah.
setup. So yeah, that's a great point that, you know, this isn't the end of development on ProRes RAW. Let's see here. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some updates there. Someone asked, where'd it go? What's the next manufacturer to adopt RAW, do you think? Who said that? Where'd it go?
Well, while you're looking for that, Rimrock, I'm confused about ProRes RAW then. When you bring a clip in, does it look like a log clip or does it have a LUT? That's actually a very good question.
Yeah.
It really depends. Both. Yes. I mean, by default, if it recognizes the camera system, then it can, in fact, essentially LUT the image for you. But that is an on-off option. And when it's off, you're looking at a video signal representation of the raw file in log generally. Unless, yeah, well, you are. That's what you are doing. If you're using the C200 and you're using Cinema Raw Lite, when that file comes in, you can actually change what the log interpretation is. And that's not just in Final Cut Pro, that's in Premiere Pro, that's in Resolve. You essentially, it will get interpreted from that camera as Canon Log 2 because that's the most dynamic range that that camera is going to give you. And it will also show it to you in Cinema Gamut, which is the widest gamut or color range that the camera has. But then you can go in and actually change that and just quickly and easily say, I really don't want to see all those uglies in the shadows. Let me switch this over to Canon Log 3 or whatever it is that you want to do. So it's all camera dependent. And then, you know, that's the deal with that.
AP Studios, I'll let Jem answer this after my little thing here. Is Canon going to give up their CX100 or C100, 300, 500 line by making RAW over HDMI available in their DSLRs? Absolutely not.
No way. Canon.
I don't think. I think Canon would be the last manufacturer to do anything with RAW over HDMI.
No,
that's just the Canon way. Like over CES, that Sharp camera that blew up, that 8K mirrorless.
Yep.
Everyone was going nuts, and then like right after that, Canon released an announcement that we have a 4K camera in the pipeline. Which is what a dumb, stupid thing to say. Like, you know, they're going to come out with that.
You mean 8K camera?
8K. What did I say? 4K?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe they'll come up with that too eventually.
Yeah.
That sounds more like
we have an 8K R camera in the future in our RF camera, which is their new mount and everything.
Yeah, probably in motion JPEG is the codec.
Yeah, that'll be out 2025 or so. Yeah. My guess, if that. Like Canon is just, they make some great pro level stuff and their stuff is solid, except for the R. Have you guys seen that? Not to get off in a rabbit trail, but the R is having some serious issues.
Really?
Like they're randomly bricking the top screen. The top screen, people are pulling the camera out of their bags and it's just broke.
Have you still got one that you're testing?
I do have one.
Give it back?
No, that's long gone. I just bought one. Cass uses it for stills.
Cool.
Yeah.
And it's a fun camera. I haven't had any problems, but it feels cheaper. And the box that it came in was almost like paper cardboard, like cardstock.
Oh, yeah.
I did a whole Instagram thing on it. It was absolute trash. Anyway,
1DC,
Canon's just not keeping up with the real bleeding edge stuff, I feel. But the higher you go up, the better it gets, right? So your C200 is just dynamite.
Well, it is and it isn't, because it's there's bits with that are very frustrating, but what Canon do very well is that they're always, I feel, a step behind a manufacturer like Sony in terms of that bleeding edge, where Sony, they'll just stick everything in. New camera, like what have we got on, whereas Canon are sort of protecting other product line. But what they do very well is implementation of that maybe one generation back bleeding edge stuff, that they just implement it beautifully, and usability is so good on those cameras. That's always been the case.
So, Jem, do you have any rebuttal thoughts on that before I move on?
Definitely no rebuttal thoughts. I mean, I'm hoping that Canon like they did with the C700, finally get their ass in gear and support ProRes, because if they support ProRes, then they'll be open to ProRes RAW. And I kind of feel like they're taking interim steps right now with their versions of RAW. They're giving it to us, and Cinema Raw Lite is nice, and they could give it to us at half the data rate, and it would be even nicer to have an option like that. But quite honestly, you know, stop dicking around and just get on board with ProRes RAW and be done with it, because you've got a capable codec, pay the damn fees, get over yourself, and you know, let's get on with business. So if that's not straightforward enough for me, that's my feelings. Okay, I do want to bring up Philip. You know, I love Canon, but sometimes, you know, we get annoyed, and I'm allowed to do that. So Philip, gentlemen, what's next after all the major manufacturers adopt RAW? It's a given, I think, seeing how log formats have dominated for the last few years. I brought this up time and time again. The real problem that we're having right now is that we haven't quite transitioned into being able to see on our monitoring devices what our cameras are capturing. And that's true even with just 10-bit 422 at 400 megabits per second in log with a wide gamut. So forget about RAW. So I think that the next frontier for us as content creators is actually starting to see what the hell our cameras are actually capturing, and being able to deal with that, because there's so many displays out there that now have some form or another of HDR support, P3 into Rec 2020 with higher dynamic range and contrast ratio. So I'm far more interested in that than I am the other stuff. And I think that that's where my focus will be, because it's just gotten so good even without RAW. So
and just following on from that, the interesting thing with the technology going on for the displays now, being able to display a lot brighter displays and being able to display much bigger dynamic range, is that if you're then pushing that brightness and brightness and brightness, and you're going to need to power that as well. So it's this kind of twofold thing that we're waiting on better power solutions for cameras for doing that internally as well. So that's, you know, with so much of the world's advancing technology, battery technology is one of those things that holds things back.
Yeah, the whole HDR thing is going to be a really hairy transition. Because like if I'm grading for HDR, like today, if I'm grading for HDR, I have to choose. All right, well, am I going to give the guy who spent the money for a 1000 nit TV to let him enjoy that? No, I'm going to grade it for the cheap, you know, fool who bought the HDR 400 nit TV.
Dude, it's so Wild West right now, and
it's really messed up.
I will tell you that whether we think we will or not, as this next crop of UHD 4K displays with higher dynamic range and bigger gamut comes out, we will, except for the color graders out there, be relying upon hopefully good LUTs that are provided to us from these camera manufacturers, so that we can use them as a starting point, like we do with 709 LUTs. We'll be using P3, and we'll be using 2020 LUTs a lot more than we were. You know, the C300 Mark II is kind of a ridiculous camera, because I think it's been on the market for 4 years right now, or close to it. And that camera actually has P3 and Rec 2020 LUTs built into the camera system. You can't load them on that camera system, but it was so forward thinking from that standpoint, which is why I think that camera has had such a long life to it, even though it lacks some of the features that you're getting in some of the other digital cinema cameras. So it's just a fascinating time right now in terms of what's going on. I didn't think we would have a lot to talk about here, and we're already at
here we go,
47 after the hour.
Jeez. So lightning round as we right before we jump into question mania. We talked a lot about the RAW formats. What's kind of looking forward a little bit? So we've had kind of the log wars, not log wars. We're kind of in the middle of that, but like everyone's got log,
right?
Yeah.
Not all of them have figured it out or have LUTs, or it's just kind of like
it's like
F log. F log is F log from Fuji. It really is. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Nikon.
No, not yet. No, Fuji's got a little bit more work.
No, Fuji's got it figured out. I'm thinking of Nikon with N-Log. It's like crazy flat, nothing to help you back you up. No white paper, no LUT, nothing. But yeah, so we had the LUT thing, like Jem was talking about. We've kind of had that race of like UHD 10-bit has been a thing on these smaller cameras, much less the larger stuff. So with RAW, what does that look like for cameras going forward, and companies like Atomos? Because Jem and I have talked about, like, is there a shelf life for video recorders? But with this, maybe we have these tiny little boxes with sensors in them, and then Atomos has these other boxes that do all the RAW stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't, I don't know if I really saw this coming the way it sort of played out in the last 9 to 12 months, to be honest with you. I thought monitor recorders were going to go into the, into the graveyard, and we were getting so good at recording internally to these cameras. And then all of a sudden, ProRes RAW, BMD RAW, all of these other options, RAW over HDMI. And now all of a sudden, I kind of feel like, Jeremy's a really smart guy, because
he's right there.
He's right there, ready
he's like
to
falling
take it
backward into the grave, and then he's like, but
thank God I know Japanese fluently. That's not me. That's Jeremy. So, I really think that it's really interesting times right now, because I do think that we have a longer shelf life for external recorders, because everybody wants to eke out as much as they can out of these camera systems. And whether or not we need to, that's up for debate. But because, I constantly go back and have to remind myself that when I'm creating content on a regular basis that is not of a certain type of content, that if I'm shooting in UHD 4K, if I'm shooting in 10-bit, if I'm shooting in at least 420, preferably 422, and I'm shooting at a data rate with a decent codec that is at least 300 to 400 megabits per second, maybe with a better codec, 200 megabits per second, the amount of information that is, if properly white balanced and exposed correctly, that is inside of that file is going to give me what I'm going to want in most of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. So if the promise is that I can do that in terms of file size and workability in an LLE, and I can do that in RAW, then I'm game. And if it's really true that 12:1 compression with BMD RAW is at the data rates that it is, and you can look at the data sheet, having to do with that tiny, and you can do that, and I can work with that file and still have all of the benefits of RAW, then I'm down for that. But it doesn't mean that I'm always going to stick a Ninja 5 onto every camera system that I'm using and just say it's RAW all the time, because there is a reality of having a 5-inch monitor with a big battery system and cables that I'm worried about coming out. Also as part of that, and I'm still always going to gravitate to recording internally if I think that I can get what I need for that project. Gentlemen?
Absolutely. And with the FS700, the only way to get decent images out of that was to use an external recorder. And it's a pain in the ass. Like, I travel all the time, as we talk about frequently, and to have to take another set of batteries, which is different to the camera that I'm using. With the FS700, it was the same battery. But it's more crap to carry around. It's more stuff that can go wrong, more stuff to get broken. And that's the nice thing. And one of the main reasons that I ended up changing camera systems was because I don't want to be taking that stuff around with me anymore. But if it's the only way you're getting that better image out of it, then yeah, you're going to do it. But it's at a cost for convenience, for sure.
But also at the same time, this is kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of this yet. If Atomos is doing RAW over HDMI, and like Jem's been talking about forever, they come out with that Ninja Star that does RAW. And if you can throw these super fast, SD cards in there, then that whole argument just vanishes.
Oh, and on that, so with the C200 thing, just going back to, because it's been talking about with the raw stuff from that, and I've shot a bit of test footage, love it. So CFast cards are still not coming down in price as quickly as I think any of us thought they would.
No.
They are reducing, but they're still way expensive. So I've been looking at some of the external solutions for that, and they are quite compact and will not really add a lot of bulk to the camera, and they're using M2 SSD drives.
That's right.
And that's kind of small thing. You know, I'm still not convinced, because you end up having to close the door and all, but the Ninja Star, that's an ideal, perfect product. If we don't need the monitoring, we don't need the bulk, we're just wanting to have a better format to record to.
And those they're also very expensive, but the new standards with the XQD, this is like the cheapest one, but
much cheaper than CFast.
So they're so small. Like, if anyone hasn't used them yet, they're not much bigger than an SD card.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is QXD. This is SD.
Sorry. Yep.
Really not that much bigger. And this guy is gonna. I can't remember the speeds, but it's getting close to, if not way faster, right? Than CFast, or is it about on par?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Well, I thought the brand new, like just like a month ago or a couple weeks ago. Someone smarter than me could probably.
So we're talking about storage here, which I think is fascinating, because it does relate to this whole, you know, RAW thing and compressed RAW. Why isn't it that manufacturers haven't, forget about the, I mean, I want a Ninja Star, whatever it's called, a Sumo Star, or whatever the hell they're going to call it, Samurai Star, you know, Harry Carey Star. But basically, what I don't know.
It's something Japanese.
Yeah, something Japanese. But here's the question. Why aren't we now in digital cinema cameras seeing SSDs as our recording medium, so that we don't have to offload? And so we could have plug 2 SSDs into there, and then we can just pull that out and just start editing off of it. Why hasn't that happening?
Well, it has in some cameras.
It has in some cameras. I don't want to say it's not there, but why aren't we seeing that trend grow more? Because
I wonder if it's a mechanics and it's a financial thing.
The cynic in me says it's a financial thing.
Yeah, because Sony or whoever, Red, you know, the money Red is making off of those Red mags.
Right.
Like they might. I wouldn't be surprised.
They're basically doing it. I mean, that's the Red mags are different, but
But you know what I mean, like a custom, you know, drive system or whatever. Are you talking about, like, why are they using CFast and whatnot instead of just SSDs?
Alex got the best name, Kamikaze Star.
There you go.
That is the best star. That is the best. That is what it should be called. Jeremy would be all over that, by the way.
Instead of like a plane going in an aircraft carrier, it's like a Ninja Star going into the Blackmagic design logo.
or just right into Grant Perry.
Yeah.
We're so horrible, people. What's going on?
I apologize. Demonetized. That's what just.
Oh my God. I'm glad I'm the little thumbnail size, because it could be anybody's voice who said that.
Oh man,
not really.
Not mine. It was definitely too deep to be my voice.
Oh no.
Okay, Lollipop Man. Oh my God. Here we go.
Okay, so wow. I'm comments. Let's get some comments taken care of. Storage. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I digress there. And it's not that there aren't SSDs there on the market. It's just certain camera companies like Canon, they could adopt SSDs as their recording format because they have nothing to lose, because they don't really make media. Sony is making money off those XQD cards.
Yep.
Right. And so are some of the other manufacturers. So, oh my goodness. Oh my God. And we have bad karma in the house now. So we've had Grumpy Penguin, bad karma, and we've had
part-time films.
Oh my God. It's amazing.
We had a negative show on the
Bang Up Week.
There you go.
A bang up week. Gentlemen, what do we get? What are we talking about next week?
Comments.
All right, let's do comments.
Next week.
We got to wrap up soon.
Yeah, we do.
Come on. Oh my goodness.
We got to get some comments in here.
Oh, let's do it.
Ian, with your lighting question, very similar, way better quality on the aperture and consistency in color. Questions. Trying to look up here. What about CFast 2 with the SSD interface adapter?
That's what I was just talking about with the solution. I can't remember what there's two manufacturers make it for.
Okay.
They do them for C200, but they also do them for the Blackmagic cameras as well.
Nice. I want to see like a USB-C, but not crappy connection solution, because that's amazing.
Lockable.
Yeah, or just a latching something.
I had a conversation with a drive manufacturer about that the other day, and believe it or not, there may actually be a solution to that. We'll see what happens.
I'm just tired of like the locking everything. Like, can we just get a good connection, like a latching cable connector?
Totally. There's a company named Perfect Path that makes HDMI cables full size, and they actually are locking HDMI cables. They do exist, but there's just not a lot of them out there. So,
so my on a recorder. Any other questions, guys?
But I don't think so. It's a different model that I was talking about. There's a few, but there's two specifically that do the C200, and there's some that do the crossover, and there's some that are just the Blackmagic. So it wasn't the Atok one, and my brain's fried this evening. It'll come to me.
Cal, none of us have actually tried the Aperture RGB panel unless they brought Caleb something in his special cave.
I've played with it in person, but not here. I don't have one now. Okay. I think that's maybe they're saving that for NAB.
Yep. Yeah, it's not long. They're getting into that game for sure.
Yeah.
Good.
I want to see them do tube lights. I don't know why they haven't done it yet. Who knows? Maybe we'll see it at NAB.
Yeah. That would be great. Any other questions here? HDR is scary. Bart, I agree. Yeah.
Not terribly, I feel. No. It's just more. Instead of 100, 0 to 100, it's 0 to 1,000 and beyond.
Or 10 and beyond.
The hard part is if I've got 0 to 1,000, but Joe has 0 to 300, how do we deal with that?
Well, a lot of that has to do with how you target in post, and that's really what colorists are dealing with right now. When they did an HDR, from production to post field workshop last year, Robbie Carmen came in and he did the second half of it, and it was really fascinating to watch the process that he has to go through in order to set up basically HDR content for delivery, because there's the auto way to do it, which is, you send out a signal with something that has lots of data, and then they basically parse it out based on the screens they encounter. But creatively, you don't have a lot of control when you do that. So really what you want to do is create versions and all of that kind of stuff. So
we could do a whole episode on monitoring and distribution and viewing. It would be way less viewers, I feel. But like for instance, when are we going to get to the point where Steven Spielberg can along with his film, there's a bit of metadata that reads if you as a user hit a little checkbox, he gets to control your TV settings. When is that going to happen?
Yeah, when is that going to happen? Ned,
that's
by the way,
I know for a fact it's being worked on now, but I mean, come on. It's ridiculous.
Ned has asked a question twice having to do with color grading and correction. I'm not the right person for that, but any advice on raw workflow and this new ACES I'm hearing about? We're not going to touch ACES right now. That's a rabbit hole, but basically just so that you understand what the concept of ACES is you have, let's say, 12 different cameras that are shooting their versions of log and different color gamuts, and they all come into one project. We'll say documentary because that's the best example of that, right? And now you have to use all of those cameras' footage together in one. What the promise of ACES is to take all of that stuff, and even if those cameras don't have all of the same dynamic range and all of the color information, you equalize the image to a base. Yes, some of the footage will have more dynamic range, some of it will have less, some will have more color information, but the base image that you're starting with is essentially the same from all the cameras. So when you start to work with that footage from all of those multiple different cameras, or even two of the same cameras that weren't set up the same, then you have a starting point. So that's just a little snippet of ACEs, and it's not something that is really coming into our workflows very oftentimes. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, on that aced note, that was terrible.
That was
time to end. That was really bad.
I'll drink. You know, we never cheers. By the way,
we didn't. So I failed you guys. Maybe we'll just end on that. Cheers, gentlemen. Cheers. Hope you all have a wonderful evening. Everybody, thank you for joining us. See you next week.
See you next week.